Hey guys, Sandro here from Carcraft Auto Detailing in Melbourne. As I tend to talk about paint scratches and defects quite a lot, I thought I'd do a video that covers the actual scratches themselves, discussing how to firstly and importantly identify them, avoid them, and what techniques can be used to rectify them, as well as showing the potential risks in sanding out scratches and the compromises that sometimes need to be made. I'll also let you know that the paint I'm working with in this video is extremely soft and thin Honda paint, which should really help amplify the defects and show the increased risks and issues of correcting this delicate thin paint. When I'm talking about paint defects, there's a multitude of various blemishes that fall into that category, such as paint transfer, oxidation, water and bird poo etchings, stone chips, clear coat failure, rust, and dents, just to name a few. But what I'm largely referring to and wanting to cover in this video is scratches. Scratches, in my opinion, are a category of defects in themselves and can vary immensely, from light to heavy, from individual to multiple defects, both being induced as a byproduct of cleaning and/or correcting paint, or as random isolated incidents. So being able to identify, eliminate, and ultimately avoid them is quite an important process in both correcting and maintaining a vehicle's paint. So I'm just going to cover the most common scratches I generally encounter, some of which you may not even typically consider as a scratch, but on a more magnifying scale, they actually are scratches that prevent the paint from looking its best. So firstly are the quite fine scratches known as haze that is usually a byproduct of compounding paint and appear as tiny, thin, uniform scratches that from afar look more like a slight haze or dullness on the paint, rather than actual scratches. The best way to truly spot them is with controlled lighting, being in a dark environment and using a singular light source that focuses in on the paint. But some direct sunlight will also bring these scratches to focus. This compounding haze is really quite normal as a primary stage of correcting paint. However, it really must be followed up with a lighter stage of polishing to refine and eliminate these scratches. A step down from compounding haze is micromarring. This really is the finest of all scratches that you're likely to encounter on car paint, and is really what separates a good paint correction job from a great paint correction job. These are really tiny, super fine scratches that occur even when you're on your final polishing stage, and they're the paint's way of telling you that you need to adjust your products and/or techniques in order to avoid or eliminate them. But often, that's far easier said than done, as any good detailer should confirm that the true test of paint correction is finishing down flawlessly, especially on darker and softer paints, where micromarring becomes quite a difficult thing to avoid, as black paint in particular will greatly amplify these ever so slight defects, and even more so, the greater challenge is soft paint, that with its ever so sensitive surface requires a delicate, slow and gentle method of polishing to achieve a mar-free finish. But it's not like I can say, use this polish, pad and this machine speed and you won't have any micromarring. It's just such an individual catering method that is all about trialing and discovering what the particular paint responds best to. Sometimes working shorter periods with the polisher to ensure the paint remains cool produces better results, whereas other times working a particular polish in for longer periods to ensure it breaks down and refines the paint also works best. Although you may not look at paint with micromarring and think that it's scratched, you will however notice that it just looks perhaps a little hazy, and no matter how hard you may try to rectify this by adding a wax or sealant on top, until the paint is correctly refined, it will never display the same gloss, clarity and depth that only correctly finished paint will. It's all about how light interacts with the surface. When the paint is truly perfect, light will reflect off that surface cleanly and at the same angle it hits it, creating a beautiful, highly gloss appearance to the eye. Whereas if the paint has even slight micromarring, the light gets trapped and bounces around in these scratches, and it appears as a haziness or dullness to the eye. Also common is what we refer to as holograms. These are pretty much induced on the car paint when a rotary polisher, or to a lesser extent a dual action polisher, is used in a somewhat aggressive manner to compound the paint. In a shaded environment or overcast day, you will struggle to see them, but once again, direct sunlight or a defect spotting light are the best way to highlight these defects. They are called holograms because when direct light is shined on them, they mostly appear as a 3D hologram of wavy lines hovering above the paint. Basically, holograms are the imprint of aggressive polishers' pads and machine speeds that are left on the paint. And although creating holograms on paint as a primary stage of correction is fine and somewhat normal, gone are the days that it's acceptable to finish paint with these defects. Well, at least for those who care and have pride in their work. So once again, it's all about refining the paint with less aggressive products and techniques to eliminate these holograms. So whether you're working with a rotary or DA polisher, using slower machine speeds, faster arm movements, less downward pressure and less aggressive pads and polishers is generally how to go about removing these holograms. Thirdly, one of the most common scratches are swirl marks. These are usually a result of improper washing and drying of a vehicle and appear as a spider web pattern when light is directly shined on the paint. Direct sunlight on a clear day will usually highlight these scratches, but a defect spotting light in a dark or shaded environment will even more so quite expose these swirls. The truth is that it's virtually impossible to avoid swirls entirely, as it only takes a single piece of loose dust to get between your wash mitt or drying towel and the car's paint to cause a light swirl. However, the majority of these swirls are usually caused by using and reusing dirty sponges and drying towels where the dirt particles continuously abrade the paint. So you can immensely reduce these swirl marks by adopting the safer 2-bucket wash method, using only light pressure with your microfiber mitts and towels to both wash and dry the paint, and using straight motions rather than circular motions when washing and drying the vehicle. There is really so much more that can be said and done to safely wash any vehicle and avoid these swirls, but the points I just stated are a great start. As a whole, the majority of swirl marks are usually one of the easiest scratches to remove, and a light compound or even a polish can eliminate them mostly. But what you'll also find commonly is that although you can remove a good 70 to 80% of them with just a single stage of polishing, the last 20 to 30% will usually require more aggressive second and third stages of polishing to remove, as within those lighter swirl marks you'll most certainly discover deeper scratches, but they'll only be truly identifiable after you've removed the lighter ones. Then we have reds, which are random isolated deeper scratches, and for the most part these are the ones that stand out the most. They are usually fairly easy to spot under most lighting and for the most part are what the general public considers as a scratch. But again, reds can vary immensely, from lighter scratches that have only just penetrated the clear coat to deeper ones that have gone right through. Reds are also generally one of the hardest scratches to eliminate and also the most risky in relation to burning through the paint. There is really endless ways of creating reds on paint, from improper car washing, brushing up against the paint with certain clothing and jewellery, parking at the local supermarket, and unfortunately intentional vandalism. The main issue with most reds is that generally polishing and even compounding rarely eliminate or greatly improve their appearance, as you can hopefully see that using both these processes had very little effect on these scratches. As I touched on at the start, this is extremely soft paint. So what that means is that just 20 seconds or so with a fairly light 2000 grit sanding paper with little pressure is enough to sand or burn through this paint in an instant. Whereas I know from previous experience that if this was a harder German paint, I'd most likely be sanding for a few minutes to burn through the paint. Also, you can hopefully see that these scratches are still present even after I've sanded right through the paint. And although they did seem fairly shallow in comparison to the larger, deeper scratch below, they were still deep enough to penetrate the clear. Scuffs are another form of scratches. They are more or less a cluster of many scratches that occur at the same time when either your car comes in contact with something while driving, or something comes in contact with your car, such as grazing another car, or the side of a fence or your garage wall. And I've even had a few pet scuffs to remove from dogs jumping up on the side of the cars. Sometimes these scuffs are just unavoidable, but I guess taking a little more care while driving is the only real way you can avoid them. But in the end, you can't always control what someone else will do or a neighbour's cat or dog jumping onto your car. These are easily the most obvious scratches to spot and usually can be seen from quite a distance away. In general, if these deeper scratches are contained within the clear coat, they will need to be either heavily compounded out or wet sanded out, as the paint surrounding them needs to be leveled down in order to either remove or at least reduce their severity. But knowing that this paint is both thin and soft, taking an even less aggressive sanding method for just a few seconds at a time and accepting that you'll only be able to improve and reduce the scratch's appearance rather than entirely remove it, is a compromise that needs to be made. As you just saw, that trying to sand out a random deep scratch on this paint resulted in a far greater defect of burning through the paint. Lastly, another form of scratches that is commonly seen on cars is sanding marks. These can actually be far more difficult to spot, simply for the fact that they are refined with compounding and polishing that rounds off the edges of those scratches so that they don't stand out as much. But when light hits those scratches at a certain angle, they can suddenly appear quite distinctive. These are for the most part a result of poor sanding and refining of the paint at the time the car or panel was painted, as well as a result of a poor scratch repair job, and can appear as fine lines from block hand sanding or circular scratches, as well as what is known as pigtails from machine sanding. Unfortunately, the only way to remove these defects is to yet again sand the paint. The truth is that they're a lot more common than you think, but the other truth I've found is that most of my customers aren't even aware that they have them on their paint. Because, as I mentioned, they are a defect that is created earlier on in the paint refinement stage. So unlike a fresh, untouched scratch with round edges and white chalky clear coat surrounding it, these sanding marks have been compounded and polished over, appearing less obvious to the average eye. The only real way to avoid them is to use honest, quality professionals who take pride in their work when repainting or repairing your car's paint. There is really so much more that can be said about these defects in relation to spotting, identifying, correcting and avoiding them. And I hope to do some more up and coming videos that look more closely at my defect spotting light sources, refining paint to avoid micro marring and haze, and some more in-depth sanding and compounding in relation to scratch and defect removal. But I thought this would be a good video to start with to first gain a better understanding of the scratches themselves. I really hope you guys found this video useful. Please like, comment and subscribe to show your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.